Here are 8 Pokemon cards you should buy in March 2026. Card 8. Last month I recommended this really awesome looking Charizard from the Lost Origin Trainer Gallery. I'm going to double down with another Charizard, also from the Sword and Shield era. This amazing Charizard V Promo. There are a ton of amazing Charizard Pokemon cards out there, and I think that's actually working in our favor here. You can get this card for less than $50. My goal for these videos isn't always to just find cards that I think are going to skyrocket in price. I'm a collector first and foremost. I'll find some cards that I think are going to do that, but a card like this, I think will go up a little bit over time, but really I'm just pushing it because I think it's amazing. Anytime you have a Charizard looking a little cheeky, a little goofy, done in an art style that's kind of unique and interesting, it's going to do well. People are going to enjoy it. And I think this one really fits the bill. You know, he clearly rampaged through like some kind of forest during a battle or whatever. And I don't know if people noticed, but there's actually a cheeky little Venusaur in the background here. Anytime you have multiple Pokemon on a card, it typically does well. There's a reason things like the tag team cards have really popped off of late. Okay, let's take a look at my collection tracking app here. You can see, like I mentioned, the card is only $49, only in quotes. You know, it's a card from 4 years ago, so it's not crazy unreasonable, especially for a Charizard. You take a look at the price history over the past year or so. I should mention this is $49 Canadian. We'll look at the USD price in a sec. It jumped up, you know, in the past little while up to, you know, $64, which is pretty crazy. Leveled back down a little bit and kind of leveling out here at a fairly stable price, you know, little dips up and down. We can check over here on price charting, which is pretty good, again, for checking trends over a longer period of time. You can see when it was released, just like most Pokemon cards of that time, it was quite a bit cheaper. Sub $10 USD. You know, it's $32 to $35 ungraded now, with PSA 10 being $360. Just a quick look at the last sold stuff on eBay. Is right around those prices, with one that was potentially cheaper there, but you know, around the $30 to $35 mark there. Cards 7 and 6. These two cards here are pretty special. I'm talking about Thundurus and Tornadus from Black and White's Emerging Powers. Wow. You've probably never seen these cards and maybe have not even heard of them. And that's because Pokemon and Pokemon card collecting really wasn't that popular during the Black and White era. Me personally, I was really into collecting at that time, so I have a lot of nostalgia for them and really love a lot of these sets, which is why I have so many X and Y era sets that are almost complete. This set is kind of special because I think it's going to really illustrate a point about the current modern Pokemon collecting market, and really how Pokemon, the company, is structuring Pokemon collecting. Now there's one thing to point out immediately with this set. Look at the full set market value in Canadian here, $360-ish. That's kind of crazy. If I pop over to a modern set, let's say Phantasmal Flames, you can see the full set market value is almost $2,000. This is really what Pokemon card collecting was like for the longest time. You know, a base set would cost you around $300 in the late 2010s. I myself got Charizards, base set Charizards for under $30. And the modern market and really the way Pokemon has set up pull rates has forced a lot of these things to skyrocket. So you can see the set itself was smaller than what we're used to nowadays. But I want to just quickly sort by price here and point out the Thundurus and Tornadus are actually the two rarest cards in the set, and they're both ultra rares. It used to be that ultra rares were kind of special. There would only be a couple of them at most, and they were still pretty accessible and pretty cheap to get. Now we're used to a lot of full art cards and more dramatic illustrations, but at the time these things were considered very cool and very interesting. There weren't a lot of cards done in this style. You can see that there are the only cards in this set like that. You know, back in the day where holo rares were actually interesting and people wanted them. For example, there's this $4 holo rare right here, which is just a Thundurus. So you can pop into the cards themselves and see. It says $35 here, but you can get it for a lot cheaper than that. I actually bought one of these just the other day for under $10. Now, it wasn't a near mint condition, it was more like an LP card, but still, you can find near mint cards for $20-ish Canadian. You can see that the price is actually kind of leveling out and going down a little bit, so definitely don't buy one at $35 here, and aim for some of those cheaper ones I was talking about. If we pop over to the USD prices, you see that it's better illustrated over here. The $16-ish USD, the card was actually really cheap for a really long time. This is a card that came out in like 2014 or something like that. And it was like $3 to $5 card for the longest of times. And that still, as a reminder, as the rarest card from that set. Now, obviously, it's jumped up a bit more, but it's still super accessible. Emerging Powers is a set I'm going to focus on completing soon and try and master set it just because it's so accessible and I love having complete sets. In a similar vein, we have the Tornadus, which is actually cheaper than the Thundurus. This is a card I got basically when this set came out. I bought someone's collection around that time. It has a similar trend. These two cards are going to go hand in hand with every other card in Emerging Powers, where it went up a little bit. It was, super cheap for the longest time. Went up to the $30-ish mark and is now hovering back down. Again, I bet you could get this card for under $10 in reasonable condition. Let's check over on the USD price, $13-ish USD, and it's the exact same story as the Thundurus was. You can see the crazy jump between PSA 10s and ungraded. I think that's true for the Thundurus as well, yeah. Just because it's such an old card and how it was built, it's harder to keep in really good condition. The Tornadus that I have is in very good condition. The Thundurus, like I mentioned, is probably more like a low-end LP, maybe an MP, but I only got it for $8. So super happy about that. I think this is just a good way to illustrate that you can get cool cards that were pretty rare at the time for cheap still and not getting sucked into spending $1,000 on an artificially inflated modern card. Card 5. Okay, remember when I mentioned the tag team cards when I was talking about the Charizard? Well, we're coming back to that. This next card is Gardevoir and Sylveon GX from Unbroken Bonds, a Sun and Moon era set. There are actually 4 Gardevoir and Sylveon GX cards in the Unbroken Bonds set, but there's only one specific card in there that I'm thinking of when I'm talking about this. It's definitely not this rainbow one, which, in my personal opinion, I think the rainbow cards are really not a good looking card. I know some people like to collect them specifically and they're into them, but I think it's just like the laziest approach to this. Rainbow cards have a pretty terrible pull rate, and really I think they get beat out by every single trainer gallery or IR card or rare that got created after this. And look at the price on this thing, $175-ish for this, and I don't think I would spend more than $10 intentionally on this card. And to top it all off, the rainbow cards are just a modification on a different card in this set. This really pink looking Gardevoir and Sylveon GX. As much as I vouch for the fairy types and pink being a great color for Pokemon cards, this card is really not good looking at all. The pink is overwhelming with this flat background. There's no effects going on here. I think it's just really lazy. It's just a classic, lazy 5-band graphics type of card. To top it all off, this card is $115 Canadian, which is crazy. And that's just driven by the bad pull rates in these sets, and the fact it's a tag team card and people have been going crazy for those. If you know your Sun and Moon era cards and their set lists well, you may be thinking, hey, I know what card you're going to mention next. Probably this Gardevoir and Sylveon here, which is the rarest of all of them that I'm talking about. Now, this card is solid looking, but check out the price. Almost $740, which is crazy for this card. It's just the hype for tag team driving that up. There are a ton of better cards at this price point. The card I'm actually talking about is this Gardevoir and Sylveon here, which I think is actually the best looking of the 4, and funnily enough, is by far the cheapest at only $75 Canadian, and that's because its rarity is way lower. A lot of you would probably argue this ultra rare version is slightly nicer, and I wouldn't really fight you on that necessarily, but at literally 10 times the cost, I do not think it's worth it in comparison. It's maybe just a couple percentage better, and I personally prefer the dynamic posing in this cheaper one. Just look at these 4 cards side by side with their price points. I definitely know which one I'm going to dig deeper into. Okay, let's take a gander here at the card in more detail. Let's check out the price in my collection tracking app here. Take a quick look at the 1-year trajectory. You can see, like lots of cards again, it kind of spiked up. It's been pretty level, even went down a little bit. Looks like it's leveling out again, like a lot of cards on the market. With tag team cards, they hit like a crazy hype cycle like a year or so ago, 2 years ago maybe. I don't envision them dropping too much. I'm surprised they were as cheap as they were when they first came out. People were really not into Sun and Moon, myself included. I really did not like the Sun and Moon era of cards or games. And they were kind of slept on for a while. We can really see it if we pop over to price charting with the USD prices. When this card came out, sub $10 for quite a while, and just slowly rising for quite a while. Even to the beginning of last year, it was $20, and then, kind of shot up to mid-50s at one point, sitting around mid-40s USD now. I still think it's pretty reasonable at these price points. It's a great looking card, especially when you compare it to the other cards in the set that have Gardevoir and Sylveon, and both of them are solid Pokemon. Gardevoir's had its heyday and it's kind of dropped down a little bit, but both of them are well loved. People collect them, and I think this card looks solid. Card 4. Okay, this next one's pretty special, and it would allow you to throw down a little vintage Pokemon card knowledge on people. You may have done this or been in the hobby long enough to see someone do this, where they say, wow, I have this super rare first edition Pokemon card, and they end up pulling out this first edition Machamp. This card is unfortunately not rare because all of the print runs of this Machamp have the first edition stamp on it. But what most people don't realize is there is more of a true first edition for this card. I'll throw these two cards up side by side here. You can see the one on the left, even though it has that first edition stamp, it's actually the unlimited print run version of the card. It has the shadow border on the right, and you can see the dates on the bottom doesn't include 99. The card on the right, however, still has the first edition stamp, no shadow border on the right, and has the correct shadowless or first edition dating on the bottom. Now I put true in quotes because it's actually hard to distinguish between the true first edition and the shadowless edition print run versions of this card. Normally you distinguish those because there's a first edition stamp and not on the shadowless card. And because the shadowless card also includes the first edition, there's no distinguishing features on the card between the true first edition print run and the shadowless print run of this 2-pack starter set that these came from. If someone actually knows a way to distinguish these, definitely let me know. I could not find anything, and I find this stuff pretty interesting. Even if you don't care about any of that stuff, well, this card is just cool as heck. The hollow effect on it is pretty unique for this set with the kind of background hands on there, and I think that's super cool. So if you don't even have the non-rare, cheaper first edition, I would recommend getting that. If you really want to kind of flex in your collection, there is this card that I'm talking about, the shadowless / real first edition version of this card, and it's still really cheap for something like this. Let's look at my collection tracking app like we have for the past few. You can see that the cheap one is, for a near mint condition, is only $38. You can get them for like 15 to 20 Canadian or cheaper because there's just so many of them. Sometimes you can even find them in original plastic wrapping if you care about that. The true first edition is a little bit more expensive, but this is still really cheap for a first edition card. And I'd actually say this $93 here is pretty inflated. While filming this, I'm in the process of trying to buy one of these, and there's been a couple close calls of me being able to get it for under $40, which I think is a great deal. And with a little patience, I think I'm going to get that. And I'd be more than happy to add a second Machamp to my collection for that kind of price. We can pop over to the price charting prices here, which show in USD, which is approximately $40-ish USD. The interesting thing here is the price has been like crazy stable for something like this. Just going up a little bit in recent times. It actually had a dip and then back up. This is a 5-year outlook. If you recall from all those other cards, it was a pretty obvious kind of rise over time. And I think that people just have like a kind of Machamp fatigue or just don't know about this card. So I think it's kind of a cool way to bring some knowledge to your collection and be a little unique, even though it's something that is pretty common. Absolutely recommend trying to snipe one of these for yourself. Card number 3. Okay, we're jumping back to modern with this one. And the card in the number 3 slot is this Eevee from Twilight Masquerade. I actually had this card queued up for my last month's video and it just didn't make the cut, and that was a mistake. This is an awesome looking card, and look at this price trend here. You can see we have this kind of double dip spike thing going on here where it started when it was released at $115-ish Canadian and then dropped way down to 68. Shouldn't say way down, that's still pretty expensive for a Pokemon card. Hit that spike again in the middle of last year and then down. And that would have been around where I was originally researching it for last video. And if I'd pulled the trigger then, it would have been better off because it's gone up almost $30 or $25-ish since then. Now, I don't think it's going to keep doing this like crazy up and down. It'll probably be either a steady riser or an aggressive riser. This is an Eevee card, which is a super popular Pokemon, and look how many Eevees are on there. There's no way that this is a card that people forget about or anything. This is going to be even a core card of some people's collections, I think. So like I said, it's kind of already up over the $100 Canadian mark again. Let's pop over to price charting and see how it looks over there. You can see it's sitting around mid-60s for USD with a pretty steady outlook. It doesn't show as aggressive of the up and down as my tool was showing, but there is still this trend here that it was doing. And like I mentioned, the card itself is awesome. If you're into like the cuter style Pokemon cards, this one is definitely one for you. Card 2. I've been showing off a lot of good mid-tier price range cards here, but for this one, we're going super cheap. Check out this common Magmar from Brilliant Stars. The art style might jump out at you immediately, and that's because this is a Shinji Kanda card, infamous for this Magikarp, Seismitoad, and Giratina. He's got a ton of great artwork cards, and I actually think this one stands out in a pretty unique way. Magmar's not a Pokemon that most people pay attention to. He's kind of goofy looking with his head there, but the way Shinji did this artwork is very interesting. He's got this really cool art style that is across most of his cards, and the fire that Magmar is breathing out kind of looks similar to the clouds in the background with that red effect. It's got this really intense sky with space elements to it, and then it's almost Christmassy with the snow. There's just like so many things happening here that I actually think comes together pretty well in a pretty unique way. And I've mentioned this in other videos, Shinji cards are incredibly busy. This is not an exception, but because it's just a common card, it's not a full art card covering the whole thing, that kind of contains it in a reasonable way. And I actually like that about it. Now the real kicker here, this card is like 20 cents. So you could buy as many of these as you can find, buy one, you know, just pick it up from a bulk pile from your local stores, whatever. Like, it shouldn't be difficult to find this card at all and add it to your collection. Because of that, I'm not even going to show any of these trend charts. It just does not matter. Card number 1. I actually just mentioned this card to you. It's the Shinji Kanda Seismitoad from Black Bolt. Now, this is nowhere as cheap as the Magmar I was just talking about, but a lot of the praise I was giving to that Magmar also applies here, but in the full art form. Because Seismitoad is blue and he went slightly more muted with the greenish background, green and yellow, he pops out nicely and doesn't blend in like maybe the Giratina does. And I think his art style really just kind of fits nicely here. There was some weird drama as this card was coming out because it has these little twig things that look like a 666, but that's really just nonsense. It's kind of annoying when stuff like that happens. Just enjoy the card, you know. Black Bolt's got a lot of cool stuff going on for it, and also some annoying stuff with the alternate like Pokeball print things, this kind of annoying red Victini, but the Seismitoad is one of the better parts of this set, for sure. So we can take a closer look here. I don't personally have this card yet, but it's definitely on my short list. It's fairly expensive. I believe the most expensive card I'm talking about today, at $188 Canadian. A lot of the Shinji cards are quite expensive in IR or higher form, like the Magikarp and Giratina I mentioned before. So I expect this card will kind of continue rising. We can check the price structure here, and that feels pretty consistent with that type of card. Had that early spike because it was a Shinji card. It went down because there was a little bit of drama, up kind of the typical market fluctuation that we had there. Steadily went down, as often new sets do, and then now on a kind of a steady little rise here. I expect, again, always with the caveat that if the whole Pokemon market crashes down or lowers down, none of this really applies. But this, relative to other cards, will continue to rise up. Like I mentioned, it looks great. It's a Shinji card. Seismitoad is kind of a mid-tier popularity card, but this is one of the better Seismitoad cards, so that makes it add a lot going for it. You know, black and white weren't printed a ton, so they're somewhat rare. The set itself as a whole is pretty expensive. So there's a lot of things monetarily if you care about that going for it. I don't necessarily care about that so much, but I'm thinking if this card keeps going up, this is probably going to be the cheapest time to get it. So I have to consider that. Now that 180-ish was in Canadian, so let's pop over to price charting like I would do. It's 133 to 140 USD. This chart is more smoothed out than the one I was showing, but it shows that general trend where it had those like early spikes, came down, and is now going up in little bits. You can see that the PSA 10 is like 7 times the ungraded, so that's a big jump, maybe more than some of these other cards that we saw. So if you care about grading, that's something to keep in mind. PSA 9.5 or 9 are basically equivalent tier of ungraded, which is always funny with modern cards. Me being a vintage collector, it's definitely not the case for that, and that makes sense. But yeah, I think the Seismitoad would be a great pickup if you're interested in this type of card. There we go, 8 cards I think you should pick up this March 2026. And before you go, tell your dog I said hi. Thanks for watching. If you like this kind of content, definitely let me know down below. I'm going to try and do one every single month because I find it pretty interesting seeing how this stuff plays out, and I'll be able to fact check myself and kind of see if I was right. I've been a Pokemon collector since the very beginning, so I have some knowledge and I'm still learning every single day about this stuff. And I think this is really going to be a good thing to do together. So definitely let me know your thoughts down below. Are there cards that you've noticed in the past couple of months that kind of would fit into something like this? Maybe something I can throw in the next video or something that I missed. I think that would be great. Thanks for watching.